In a time when we consider ourselves to be superior to our predecessors, making great advances in science and technology and improving the quality of our lives, it seems that our ancient ancestors were not far behind. Incredibly, they had discovered the secret of controlling the Earth's natural forces and had power in their hands.
We shouldn't be surprised that the ancients were not only able to harness nature, but also to use its force masterfully.
This is the story of power and technology in the ancient world. We know that ancient people from the classical world were sophisticated, yet in their everyday lives it seems they had technology which was not far removed from our own. Today we benefit from many modern inventions to make our lives more comfortable, yet the ancients had many luxuries we might consider modern. We live in a time of mass production and complex engineering, yet the Romans built automated factories in their towns and cities, creating an industrial revolution almost 2,000 years ahead of its time. They controlled the forces of nature through their incredible feats of civil engineering and brought civilization to the lives of the masses. Thousands of years ago, people learned how to control the power of the sun, to harness thermal energy and use water to power great machines.
When we look back at the ancient world, we think of them as backwards compared to today. It's not true at all. They were using hydraulics, they were using thermal power, they were using solar power possibly, maybe even electricity. We can't be sure. The whole gamut of energy sources that was available to them, they seemed to be using, and they were exploring it and trying to develop it all the time.
But despite many of the ancient discoveries which have been revealed, there are still intriguing mysteries which cannot be explained. In Baghdad, the birthplace of civilization, a strange object was discovered in 1936. No one has been able to prove what this enigmatic artifact was for, yet it has similar components to a 19th century battery, leading some experts to believe that people from ancient societies even knew about electricity. Incredible as it seems, could the ancients have been even closer to discovering the technology of our modern world? "2,000 years ago, the Romans had developed the technology of the ancient Greeks and were using a vast array of complicated machines and devices in all aspects of their lives, from warfare to building and industry. Yet we would know little of these ancient inventions if it was not for the work of one man, Marcus Vitruvius Pollio. Vitruvius was an architect by trade who lived during the reign of Julius Caesar. He was inspired by the architecture and engineering of the ancient Greeks and was fascinated with the works of great classical scholars. His greatest achievement was a collection of writings describing in great technical detail the inventions of the Romans and Greeks. Without Vitruvius, we would know little of ancient technology.
A key source for ancient technology is the Roman writer Vitruvius, writing probably in the 20s BC. And his work preserves for us the work of a number of earlier authors who haven't survived in the same way.
Vitruvius's work is unique. His collection of 10 books described a vast array of inventions. His attention to detail means it's possible for modern historians to truly understand the level of mechanical sophistication in the ancient world. Renaissance inventors such as Leonardo da Vinci were inspired by Vitruvius's descriptions of ancient machines.
The early editions of his work are accompanied by a number of engravings, illustrations, which show a Renaissance conception of the technology of the Roman world.
The Romans were not content just to conquer new lands. They were determined to conquer nature itself. One of the ways they would do this was by creating huge machines which controlled the power of water.
Vitruvius was fascinated with water, with mining, with economics. the movement of water particularly. His works include ideas on moving water across vast distances from places where it's difficult to move it, such as in the bottom of mines. As an engineer and as an architect, this is exactly the sort of thing he'd be interested in.
Vitruvius described a variety of ingenious and sophisticated water pumps which used moving valves to pull water upwards. He also detailed huge devices which used other methods to move water. In 2001, the remains of two gigantic Roman mechanisms were unearthed in London. They became known as the Gresham Street water wheels. They could lift water from deep wells using a series of containers linked together on a geared wheel far more efficiently than using men alone. They were incredibly similar to mechanisms in Vitruvius's writings. He also described the most famous of Greek inventions, the Archimedes screw. This simple but ingenious invention used a large spiral which revolved, forcing the water upwards. The Archimedes screw was used in Roman industry to raise water, such as from underground mine workings which had become flooded. It was effective, yet it could only move water a short distance. In deep, waterlogged mine workings, another, more complex solution was required. The Roman silver mines were particularly important as the Romans needed this metal in large quantities to make their currency, but it was often difficult to access rich silver seams deep in flooded mine workings. During mining at Rio Tinto, Spain in 1886, an unbelievable discovery was made. A gigantic wheel was found deep underground when workers blasted away a section of the mine. But what was this extraordinary ancient object? During subsequent excavations, archaeologists discovered a series of wheels deep within the mines.
Si bien se conocía la rueda de anteriormente, no se empleó en todas las minas, ni se empleó tan profusamente como, por ejemplo, ha sucedido en Río Tinto. Por ejemplo, en Filón Norte, en Río Tinto, se documentaron 8 parejas de noria, que son 16, y sacaban el agua a una distancia desde abajo hasta hacia arriba de 29 metros.
The water wheels, deep in chambers in the mine, were used to move water from one chamber to the other, moving the water higher each time until it finally reached the surface. It was a huge achievement to build such a complicated and huge mechanism deep underground. Vitruvius explained in his writings how each wheel was turned by a man who walked the wheel forward. This would have been grueling work underground in dark, wet conditions. Yet it has been estimated that a man could operate a wheel for 8 hours continuously, moving around 19 gallons of water per minute. This would have made the mine significantly more productive, and it may have been impossible to mine the silver in Rio Tinto without the huge water-lifting wheels. Romans were not the first to use such ideas, but the Rio Tinto water-lifting wheel shows how the Romans successfully adapted earlier Greek technology and used it on a massive industrial scale, enabling them to increase their vast riches and power.
En época romana lo que sucedió fue que hubo una difusión de ese conocimiento y una aplicación práctica, porque mucho de ese conocimiento de época helenística fue solo teórico. Los romanos lo que hicieron fue esa tecnología que ellos conocían, aplicarla para lo que necesitaban, que en ese momento era sacar el agua de las minas.
Around 40 similar wheels are recorded to have been used across southeast Spain alone. It was the Romans' visionary use of such technology which made them a great civilization. Yet it was their use of water as a power source, as described by Vitruvius, which was even more astounding. However, to harness the power of running water, they first needed to invent a system to provide constant running water to their cities. The Romans were ambitious and built gigantic aqueducts which could move water across many kilometers. They brought civilization to far-flung corners of the empire and created cities where none before could have existed. Vitruvius recorded in one of his books how a Roman aqueduct should be built. It was a complex and remarkable structure which was vital to the Romans' use of water as a power supply and to feed their luxurious bathhouses, fountains and gardens. Aqueducts, such as this one in Pont du Gard in southern France, still stand 2,000 years after they were constructed. This aqueduct carried water to the town of Nîmes from a natural spring in the hills around 25 kilometers away. It is an amazing feat of civil engineering.
Il a été construit par une légion qui avait un savoir-faire et une compétence en génie civil, en hydraulique. Ils avaient déjà construit 9 aqueducs à Rome. Ils en construisaient partout en Europe. Donc, maîtriser le paysage pour conduire l'eau dans une ville, c'était quelque chose qu'ils faisaient tout le temps.
The Pont du Gard is awe-inspiring. At 48 meters high, it's the tallest of all the aqueducts built in the Roman Empire. It took 15 years to complete, and even today it is the most complete of all the aqueducts built by the Romans. For the Romans designed it to last, even through the powerful floods which often hit the Gardon Valley.
Au premier et au deuxième étage, ce sont des blocs qui pèsent entre 2 et 6 tonnes, qui sont posés à sec, les uns sur les autres. Il n'y a pas de mortier. Et la conception du pont par lui-même, puisqu'elle est ouverte par des arches larges, permettait aux eaux de traverser sans briser le pont.
The water which flowed through Roman aqueducts had a crucial role in Roman life. Rome, the heart of the empire, was supplied with water from 11 great aqueducts which fed into the city. The constant running water was directed by the city engineers into fast-flowing channels, water which was used to run ancient water wheels. Vitruvius wrote detailed accounts of Roman water wheels which could be put to industrial uses around the city. For many years, archaeologists have been fascinated by the discovery of Roman water wheels across Europe. Intriguing evidence of Roman water wheels has been found in Rome, and more incredibly, the machines which they powered. The Oxford archaeologist, Professor Andrew Wilson, worked on excavations at a remarkable site in Rome in 1998. Professor Wilson excavated a large Roman industrial complex which had evidence of water wheels being used to drive a huge automated flour mill powered by water from a city aqueduct. It was known as the Janiculum Mill.
It was built in the 3rd century AD astride the Aqua Traiana, Trajan's aqueduct, which we can see in blue here running through the middle of the site. It's part of a huge complex of water-driven mills whose purpose was to provide bread for the city of Rome.
A series of water wheels was linked to a geared mechanism which turned a giant, heavy millstone. The mills would ensure there was enough flour to make bread for Rome's civilians, mass-produced by the flour mills and bakeries on a scale never before seen. Vitruvius left details in his writings of how ancient water-powered mills would have worked.
This is a French translation of Vitruvius from 1673. It contains some rather fine illustrations of the machines Vitruvius describes, but the artist has reinterpreted some of them in the light of his own experience of contemporary water mills. So this illustration shows a water-powered grain mill, which is driven by means of water flowing underneath a wheel and driving it with the paddles on the outside. On the axle of the wheel is mounted a large cogwheel, which meshes with a much smaller one mounted on a vertical spindle, which drives the upper millstone of a pair of millstones mounted on a floor higher up.
During excavations in Rome, archaeologists were able to find clues which showed that the Janiculum mill was very similar to those described by Vitruvius.
Excavations in the early 1990s found bearing blocks, stones supporting the ends of the axles of water wheels. And by using spacing between them, we can deduce that there could have been 4 wheels on the North Mill Race. On the south side, the axle was set rather higher, allowing a larger wheel, and this may suggest that it drove either a heavier set of millstones or perhaps 2 sets of millstones, one off each end of the axle.
So important was water as a source of power for the mills that during one attack on Rome, an attempt was made to block the aqueducts and bring bread production to a standstill. It is the equivalent of the electricity supply being cut off to a modern city today. Water was the lifeblood of Rome, and it was essential it was kept flowing. The automated flour mills of Rome would have been impressive, but the most incredible Roman power plant in the world was discovered in Barbegal in southern France. The ruins uncovered at Barbegal in the 1940s proved the existence of a huge Roman water-powered factory, which experts previously believed could never have been possible. Yet, in the 2nd century AD, the massive water-powered flour mill was built and could supply enough flour to feed the 12,500 people living in the nearby Roman city of Arles. The complex was constructed on a hill and comprised 16 water wheels in all, each powering a continuously turning millstone onto which a hopper dropped the grain. This was industrialization on a massive scale. The mill complex was powered by water from the aqueduct built to supply the population of Arles, but when it reached the top of the Barbegal site, a branch of the aqueduct diverted water off towards the mills. A vast quantity of water from the aqueduct must have been required to keep the mills turning.
Barbegal avait la vocation d'amener l'eau vers une série de moulins qui allaient pouvoir moudre les céréales et pour donner du blé, donc à tout l'Empire romain. Parce qu'il ne faut pas oublier que la Légion était présente dans le sud de la France.
Arles was an affluent and prosperous city in Roman times, with the Emperor Constantine briefly based here. It had a large population, but there is said to have been a shortage of slave labor in the region. This may be one of the main reasons the vast mill site was located here as a solution to the problems of manually grinding the huge amounts of flour needed in the city. The aqueduct and the mill complex would have been integral to the city during Roman times. The Barbegal mill site was built 300 years after Vitruvius described earlier water mills used by the Romans, and it shows how they had developed their water power machines to an incredibly sophisticated and efficient degree. Here, water power was exploited to a level of industrialization and mechanization which is almost impossible to reconcile with our notions of the ancient world.
The site of Barbegal, which predates the Industrial Revolution by some 1600 years, shows a very early instance of large-scale capital investment in complex machinery. It's mankind's first attempt to harness natural forces to do useful mechanical work, and as such that's the distant ancestor of a whole host of machines that we're familiar with today.
Barbegal provides evidence that the Romans were further ahead in their technological development of water power than previous excavations had shown.
At places like Barbegal, we have the evidence to show that the Romans could have had an industrial revolution, a pre-industrial revolution, to move away from a purely labour-intensive, slave-driven economy to one where they're using mechanisation and the latest developments in engineering to make their slave labour force more effective.
Barbegal is unique because it is the only large-scale water power plant to have survived. But perhaps there are many others lying undiscovered under towns and cities across the old empire. And it is tantalizing to think that if the Romans could harness water power to grind flour, did they also use it on a large scale to drive other machines? Some evidence has survived to suggest they may have used similar water wheels to cut stone blocks for buildings. Once they had mastered the technology, the possibilities would have been endless. The Romans' expertise with water systems became so developed that they were even able to move water across vast valleys where normal aqueducts could not be built, using the power of gravity. At Aspendos in Turkey, the remains of an extraordinary construction can still be seen.
To cross a valley the size of the one at Aspendos would have required an aqueduct of enormous height. But the Romans had an ingenious solution to this problem. they decided instead to harness the very power of water, developing a system based on pressurization, which used the amazing technique of an inverted siphon.
Water siphons had been used since Greek times, but the Romans adapted this technology and used it on a huge scale. The action of a simple siphon can be easily demonstrated.
Right, I'm going to pour this, we've used wine so that it's a little bit more visible. We're going to pour this into the header tank, and hopefully that should explain the principle of operation of the siphon. The gravitational force on the water should push it through the pipe and then up the other side of the pipe into the header tank at the far end.
This is the same principle on which the Aspendos siphon would have worked. A stone pipeline carried the water down to the bottom of the valley before the pressure forced it back up the other side towards the town. The Romans had harnessed the power of gravity and water pressure, making the water run uphill. They didn't build just one siphon at Aspendos, but three supported between two huge towers spanning the valley.
To create splendid cities like Aspendos and its stunning amphitheatre, the ancients needed to harness the forces of nature. Today we're often surprised that they were able to use its power so masterfully.
The Romans used their knowledge of hydraulics to develop Aspendos into a beautiful and thriving outpost of the empire. Vitruvius wrote accounts in his books of the many inventive solutions the Romans devised to get water to their main towns and cities. Yet once the water arrived by aqueduct, an effective plumbing system needed to be in place to keep the water flowing. Even in remote Roman outposts, such as the wild landscapes of northern England, the Romans set to work creating a civilized plumbing network. The Romans settled in Britain in the 1st century AD, and the Emperor Hadrian constructed his famous wall as a defensive barrier against the hostile peoples of the north. The wall itself was a huge undertaking, being at least 4 meters high, 3 meters wide, and stretching a distance of 118 kilometers. The Roman fort of Vindolanda was situated close to Hadrian's wall. It was a base for the soldiers who had been assigned to the task of keeping the northern tribes at bay. The Roman leaders knew that if they were to keep their troops happy and loyal, it was important they were comfortable and well looked after. In this cold and exposed environment, the Romans sought to tame nature and create some of the luxuries they were used to. The one natural resource which the location had plenty of was rain. The Romans devised a way of directing the rainwater towards the town so they could enjoy piped running water. The town grew into an extensive settlement with its own hospital, brewery, shops, and in particular a bathhouse for the soldiers.
The Romans aren't prepared to compromise. They get to this frontier zone, it's hostile, and they're bringing with them the latest Roman technology. They put in a fantastic water pipe system, which means that every single building inside the Roman fort at Vindolanda could have had piped water to it, which is an amazing thing when you think about it, because a couple of hundred years later, at the end of Roman Britain, this technology is no longer employed at a site like Vindolanda, and people living here didn't have water on tap.
A network of pipes had to be laid to supply the town. Vitruvius explained in one of his books that the Romans used clay and lead pipes most commonly, yet he realized that lead pipes were unhealthy as lead poisoning was common among Roman plumbers. But in Vindolanda, the Romans created an effective pipe network using the materials they had to hand.
One of the most significant finds we've had in the last couple of years on the excavations have been a fantastic water system, which is basically a whole timber frame piping system underneath the ground, built in around about 100 AD, taking water from wells, water tanks. It's absolutely amazing that it survived.
To make their main water pipes, the Romans cut down alder trees which grew on the waterlogged ground, hollowed out lengths of 1 to 2 meters, tapered the ends and mounted them securely onto oak blocks, burying the whole system in trenches surrounded by gravel. 2,000 years after it was built, the complex wooden plumbing system in place at Vindolanda is still in remarkably good condition. Yet another astonishing discovery was made 3 kilometers further along Hadrian's Wall, which proves how advanced the Romans had become. At Housestead's fort, the soldiers had access to what we might think of as a modern convenience. One of the best preserved Roman toilets in Europe can be found here. The Roman engineers created this amazing building for the soldiers posted to the wall, complete with running water to constantly flush away the waste from the fort. The toilets are a plumbing and engineering marvel. Large water tanks were constructed which could hold up to 24,000 litres of rainwater. Although it lacked privacy, the covered building would have been very comfortable. It was surrounded on 3 sides by rows of wooden toilet seats. Beneath these ran the sewage channel, fed with running water from the holding tanks.
The sewer ran in an anti-clockwise direction, and water would enter from the left-hand side here and go anti-clockwise along the main sewer and out through a culvert in the southeast corner of the fort.
It was not just a luxury, but an important hygienic commodity, ensuring that valuable soldiers were kept free from illness and were best able to protect the empire. The Romans understood the importance of good sanitation, and the supply of fresh, clean water at the site was essential. The toilets didn't just have one sewage channel. They also had running water which the soldiers would use for washing themselves. Instead of toilet paper, the soldiers each had a stick with a sponge attached to the end. A special channel running around the toilets was built so they could rinse their sponges after use.
This is a mock-up of what the soldiers would have used instead of toilet paper. It's a sponge neatly tied to the end of a stick.
The Roman soldiers enjoyed many home comforts, and life for the well-heeled would have been very pleasant. In many ways, their lives were not far removed from our own. The level of their public buildings across the empire was incredible. Their huge bathhouses were like temples dedicated to the pleasures of water. Citizens could luxuriate in heated baths or enjoy a relaxing massage. One of the most beautiful surviving Roman baths in Europe can be found in the Roman city of Bath in southern England, known to the Romans as Aquae Sulis. This bathhouse is special as it demonstrates both the Roman skill with complicated plumbing and how they exploited the Earth's thermal energy. The bathhouse was built on the site of a natural thermal spring which the ancient Britons had long held sacred. The Romans also worshipped there, and it became an important religious and cultural site which would have been visited by Romans from across the empire. The city of Bath developed around the heated water supply, which rose from deep in the earth. Much of the Roman settlement still lies hidden beneath the elegant Georgian architecture of the city. At the heart of the Roman bathhouse is the sacred spring. Here, hot water at a temperature of 46 degrees Celsius rises at a rate of over 1 million litres every day and has been doing so for thousands of years.
Before the Romans came, people had been aware of the springs and were probably worshipping here. But the water from the spring was first controlled in Roman times.
The Roman engineers knew that if they could control the hot water from the thermal spring, it could be used to create a wonderful, naturally heated bathhouse. The centerpiece of the magnificent building here is the Great Bath. This is a pool lined with sheets of lead and filled with hot water from the spring. It once stood in a magnificent hall. The bath is just over 1.5 meters deep and has steps leading down on all sides. Around the edges of the bath would have been benches for bathers and tables adorned with rich food and wine. But it was not purely a place to relax. The Romans also believed deeply in the spring's spiritual powers. In 1727, a magnificent bronze head was discovered by men working near to the baths. It was of the fertility and health goddess Sulis Minerva, who was believed to live at the spring. Worshippers left gifts of gold coins, thousands of which have been found at the site. They also left curses written on sheets of lead, which were thrown into the entrance of the spring. It is a testament to the creative ingenuity of the Romans that they saw the potential of using a supply of thermally heated water and effectively used the natural phenomenon for their own purposes.
The Romans must have understood about thermal power because they've exploited it so effectively. In the bathing system here, we have a bathhouse that, although it had heated rooms within it, was largely unheated, and yet this large pool of hot water in the middle would have helped to raise the temperature gently throughout the whole building.
The Romans used thermal heat from deep in the earth at Bath, but they also looked to the heavens to find ways of exploiting thermal energy from the power of the sun. Nowadays, we take solar energy for granted, but 2,000 years ago, the ancients also found ways of exploiting the sun's heat.
Ancient societies were fully aware of the advantages of solar power for heating. They constructed their houses to face the sun, and they were aware of the use of glass in public buildings such as bathhouses to maximize the heat retention, and also, of course, through the glass to warm those buildings up.
Evidence of glass windows has been found around the empire. This incredible 2,000-year-old piece of glass was found in the window of a building in Pompeii. It was fitted into an extremely large window. It is amazing that this ancient sheet of glass has survived. The Romans realized the effects of using glass to capture the heat from the sun, but 500 or so years earlier, the ancient Greeks had apparently already discovered ways of using the destructive power of the sun's heat. A mythical Greek invention was said to have been used as a weapon against the Romans in the 3rd century BC. It was known as the Archimedes' death ray. In Syracuse, in what is now modern-day Sicily, the inventor Archimedes was planning ways to fend off a Roman attack. A story claims he used the power of the sun to destroy the Roman ships in the harbor. It seems an unlikely claim, yet the story has survived to this day.
In 214 BC, the Romans attacked the town of Syracuse. The Syracusans relied on their most famous citizen, the philosopher-inventor Archimedes, to defend the city.
Archimedes ordered soldiers to polish their metal shields so they shone like mirrors. He then positioned the soldiers around the harbor and made them reflect the heat of the sun onto the Roman ships below.
Archimedes devised a clever system of reflecting parabolic mirrors, probably using polished shields, to send a tight, bright ray of light towards the Roman ships in the harbor. That ray would certainly have blinded their navigation, and according to some stories, the ships actually caught fire.
It is difficult to imagine that the shields could have had such a dramatic effect, yet could hundreds of them really have acted as a death ray?
Διότι πολλοί δεν πιστεύανε ότι ο Αρχιμίδης είχε κατασκευάσει κάτωπτρα τέτοια ώστε να κάψει το ρωμαϊκό στόλο. Και αρκετοί βέβαια συγγραφείς, κυρίως Βυζαντινοί, αναφέρονται στα κάτωπτρα του Αρχιμίδη και λένε ότι όντως με αυτά ο Αρχιμίδης είχε κάψει το στόλο των Ρωμαίων.
The idea that Archimedes could burn a fleet of ships with a series of mirrors has been ridiculed in many academic circles. Some historians have claimed he used lenses and not mirrors. But one defender of the mirror theory was Professor Ioannis Sakas.
Ο Σακάς πίστευε ότι ο Αρχιμίδης δεν χρησιμοποιούσε φακούς, αλλά είχε καταλήξει ότι χρησιμοποιούσε κάτωπτρα ασπίδες καλογιαλισμένες, οι οποίες με την κατάλληλη χρήση συγκέντρωναν τις ηλιακές ακτίνες σε ένα συγκεκριμένο σημείο, το οποίο έπαιρνε φωτιά.
Sakas, a tireless experimenter, spent much of his career reconstructing ancient Greek technological weapons and mechanical devices. He decided to put the Archimedes mirror theory to the test. Sakas successfully created a fire using a barrage of polished metal shields. But he decided to take the test a step further with the help of the Greek Navy.
τελικά έφτασε να κάνει το μεγάλο πείραμα το Νοέμβριο του 1973, οπότε χρησιμοποιώντας ναύτες από το σταθμό του Παλάσκα κάτω στον Πειραιά, με 70 ασπίδες μεγάλες, καλογιαλισμένες, έκαψε ένα ρωμαϊκό αντίγραφο, δηλαδή ένα μικρό καραβάκι, μια μικρή βάρκα που είχαν τα ρωμαϊκά πλοία της εποχής εκείνης.
Amazingly, the experiment proved that the Archimedes death ray really could have worked. So was perhaps not a myth after all.
Σε δευτερόλεπτα άρχισε να φαίνεται καπνός και σε 2-3 λεπτά είχε καεί.
This ancient Greek technology is actually being employed by scientists working today. In an extraordinary parallel, scientists in Colorado in America have created a vast experimental solar-powered furnace, which works on exactly the same principle as the Archimedes death ray. It focuses hundreds of mirrors onto a central point, which then heats to immense temperatures of thousands of degrees Celsius. Its future uses include manufacturing for high-tech industries. The ancients were also aware of another powerful energy source from the heavens. A force so devastating and awesome, they thought it must have come from the gods. The power of electricity. Discoveries have been made in Egypt, Crete and Greece, which suggest that the ancients were able to attract lightning to their temple buildings. It seems they were aware of the electrical force and realized it could be drawn to the ground using lightning conductor rods. The Minoans of ancient Crete, who lived over 3,500 years ago, built small temples on peaks high in the mountains with spear-like masts pointing to the sky. Minoan drawings have revealed the use of masts, which, if made of metal, could have attracted lightning from passing storms. The lightning would have had a powerful religious impact on the people who worshipped the gods. By attracting the lightning, the priests could have created a great impact and drawn people to worship. The effect must have been awe-inspiring at the height of a storm when the lightning struck. Some experts believe that there was a cult of thunder worshippers who realized that if they attracted lightning, they could bring down much-needed rain. Interestingly, the masts in Minoan art are the same pointed shape as those used by Benjamin Franklin when he reinvented them in 1752, many centuries later. High in the Peloponnese hills in Greece, ancient mountain temples have also been found, which again archaeologists believe could have been located to attract lightning. Yet the ancient Greek philosophers also tried to find more scientific explanations for the strange phenomenon of lightning.
The philosopher Xenophanes from Miletus tries to explain lightning. He puts down the idea that this was Zeus throwing a thunderbolt and tries to come up with an explanation of his own, referring to the clouds, and to a degree, I suppose, he was right.
There is also evidence from a temple in Egypt which records how copper-covered masts were attached to the entrance of the Edfu temple built in 212 BC. It seems the ancients living in Egypt understood that copper was a good conductor. It is a material we still use today in our electrical wiring. The ancient societies who tried to attract lightning showed some understanding of its powers. There was another less dramatic but equally significant type of electricity which the ancients also held sacred. The Mycenaean people of ancient Greece realized that there was a substance which seemed to have magical powers. It was the beautiful and precious material amber. Amber could hold a static electrical charge. Professor Bill Kavanagh is convinced that amber was valued by the Mycenaeans because of its electrostatic properties 3,500 years ago.
One of the reasons why they prized it must have been because of these electrostatic properties. The material is able, as it were, to make something that appears dead and inert come to life because of the electricity as we know today. I'll take this piece of amber and rub it on my woolen coat. That should build up the electrostatic charge, and then we shall see if this will attract the feather.
This would have seemed magical to the Mycenaeans, who must have realized that there was a strange force within the amber. Interestingly, the Greek name for amber is electron. Here at their capital city, Mycenae, beautiful amber artifacts were buried alongside the most precious gold treasures.
The site of Mycenae seems to have been the most prestigious of all Greece's Bronze Age centres. It became very important sometime around 1700, 1800 BC. And one of the first signs of its great prestige are some extremely rich burials.
Some of the most beautiful and opulent objects ever found in ancient Greece have been excavated from burial sites in Mycenae, including a golden mask of the great king Agamemnon, who once resided here. Large pieces of Baltic amber jewelry were discovered, indicating that amber held significance for the Mycenaeans. A Greek myth about the god Phaethon tells how he was struck by a thunderbolt hurled by Zeus. In grief, his sister's tears turned to amber. Although just a story, it indicates that perhaps the ancients made the link between the force in lightning and the electrical charge held by amber. But could the ancients have gone one step further? In one of the greatest enigmas from the ancient world, there is an intriguing clue that the ancients actually managed to create electricity. It seems an outrageous claim, but a remarkable object was found in Baghdad in Iraq in 1936. Archaeologists unearthed a tomb in the city and found a mysterious Mesopotamian jar, which is commonly believed to date somewhere between 250 BC to 250 AD. But what could this mysterious jar be?
The Baghdad battery is a small clay jar with an asphalt stopper. It has an iron rod running through the middle and is encased in a copper cylinder. When the jar's filled with some kind of electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, the jar as a battery produces just over a volt of electricity. This is an amazing discovery. It shows that the ancients had already invented the battery 2,000 years ago.
There are many who are skeptical of the claim that this could really be a 2,000-year-old battery. Yet the evidence is compelling that it could have been used to create an electrical charge.
This is a reproduction of one of the most enigmatic objects that we have from the ancient world. This ceramic vessel was discovered just on the outskirts of Baghdad in the 1930s. When they were investigated, it was discovered that they were two pieces of metal, a piece of copper tube and in the centre of that a piece of iron rod. The two metallic elements producing electrical energy. We had no idea that at that early stage the technology was understood. And if in fact these are batteries, which is one of the possible explanations, they would predate Volta and Galvani by about 2,000 years.
But could this object really work as a battery? When you compare the Baghdad battery with early batteries from just 120 years ago, you can see the similarities. They too consisted of a jar containing a negative and positive electrode, which was separated by an electrolytic fluid.
We have some mid-19th century batteries, as were invented by the Frenchman Georges Leclanché in 1867, and they consist of a glass jar. Inside it is a porous pot. Inside, running down the middle of that, is a carbon rod, and that is the negative terminal. Positive pole is this rod of zinc. They performed just like the Baghdad battery, that is to say, they generated a very low voltage current.
So if the Baghdad battery really worked on the same principles as early modern batteries, could it really generate an electrical charge?
We decided to attempt to recreate the Baghdad battery using materials as close as possible to the originals. We're using copper tubing, which is domestic plumbing piping, but which is of similar gauge. The rod in the centre is actually steel, not iron, because iron is quite tricky to get hold of nowadays. But with this and vinegar, we're going to see if we can actually reproduce the voltage from this artefact.
The electrolytic solution of vinegar allows a flow of electrical ions to move between the two terminals, which are attracted by each other's polarity, thus creating a charge. The iron rod acts as the positive terminal and the copper tube acts as the negative terminal. Using a small speaker, you can actually hear the electrical reaction taking place. When a voltmeter is attached, the battery quite clearly registers an electrical charge of approximately 1 volt. There are many varied theories as to what this electrical supply could have been used for, from medicine to religion, yet some question if it was used to generate power at all.
We all like good stories, and the Baghdad battery is one of those great stories. But for me as an archaeologist, I'm afraid it doesn't quite work. I would say it wasn't a battery to create electricity, but was part of a ritual assemblage of objects, although we don't, of course, understand all of the details of the ritual in which it might have been used.
Yet there is one theory which many experts believe is the most likely use of the Baghdad battery.
The Baghdad battery didn't produce much power, perhaps a little over a volt, but that would have been sufficient to allow silver to be plated with gold. What the Baghdad battery shows then is that electroplating is another ancient discovery.
It is thought that the practice of electroplating one metal over the top of another is a modern invention. Yet with the Baghdad battery, perhaps the ancients had also mastered this art. As a test, this coin is being dipped into a gold solution, whilst attached to 3 models of the Baghdad battery, which are running an electrical charge through it. The gold in the solution is attracted to the coin, and in only a few minutes, the coin has been completely coated in gold. The Baghdad battery seems to prove a remarkable theory, that people living thousands of years ago were able to generate small amounts of electricity. Yet when you look back at the astounding technical achievements from the ancient worlds, from the ancient Greeks, Romans and Mesopotamians, many of their inventions seem remarkable and highly sophisticated. So perhaps it is not too far-fetched to think that ancient people could have taken the first steps towards inventing electrical devices. There are many inventions which we would like to think have been invented in modern times, but it seems ancient people had already made great advances in developing technology which we may think of as our own. Ancient people realized that it was possible to exploit natural forces in many ways and even create automated machines. But if it were not for the writings of Vitruvius, we would know even less of the technology of ancient times. Yet all we have today are fragments of information, providing clues as to what the ancients were capable of. As we discover more of these fascinating devices, we get a glimpse of what startling discoveries were made thousands of years ago. Many inventions were lost for thousands of years until they were reinvented in modern times. It is intriguing to imagine what other ancient discoveries are yet to be revealed.